Hey guys, tonight, you are not stepping into the warm, nostalgic glow of the little house on the prairie that generations have cherished, where the hard winter is remembered as a challenging season that brought out the best in pioneer spirit, where Almanzo Wilder rode heroically through the snow and everyone survived to plant crops in the spring. You're standing on the open Dakota Prairie on October 15th, 1880, and you're about to witness the beginning of 7 months of uninterrupted hell. You're about to experience a winter so severe that modern meteorologists, using accumulated weather severity indices and historical climate data, have confirmed it ranks among the worst winters ever recorded in North American history. And you're about to understand why a single wagon ride to buy wheat became the difference between a town's survival and its complete abandonment. The air around you feels wrong. You're in DeSmet, Dakota Territory, a town that has existed for barely 2 years. The buildings are new. The lumber still smells of fresh-cut pine. The streets are dirt paths between wooden structures that stand exposed on the flat prairie with nothing to break the wind. Around you, settlers are finishing the tasks of autumn. Men are cutting the last of the hay from the sloofs. Women are preserving vegetables in root cellars. Children are gathering buffalo chips for fuel because trees are scarce here and coal is expensive. You notice Charles Ingalls, a 44-year-old carpenter who moved his family here from Minnesota just last year, walking through town with an expression that troubles you. He stops to examine the muskrat lodges in the slough near his claim. The lodges are thick this year, thicker than anyone has seen before. The walls of mud and reeds are built up high and dense, as if the animals know something that the humans do not. Pa Ingalls, as everyone calls him, mentions this to his neighbours. The muskrats are preparing for a hard winter. The old-timers from Minnesota, the ones who have seen 20 or 30 winters on the northern plains, might pay attention to such signs. But most of the settlers in DeSmet are new to this country. They arrived in the spring or summer, drawn by railroad advertisements promising fertile land and opportunity. They have never experienced a true Dakota winter. They assume that winter here will be like winter back in Wisconsin or Iowa or Ohio, cold but manageable, with storms that pass and clear days in between. They are catastrophically wrong. On October 15th, the first blizzard strikes. You're not prepared for what a true prairie blizzard means. This is not snow falling gently from the sky while you watch through a window. This is a wall of white that obliterates everything. The wind screams across the open prairie at 40 or 50 miles per hour, picking up snow and driving it horizontally into every crack and crevice. The temperature drops from the 50s to below zero in a matter of hours. Thunder rolls across the sky, a phenomenon so rare in a blizzard that it will be remembered and remarked upon in accounts written decades later. You cannot see 5 feet in front of your face. The world has disappeared into white chaos. If you step outside your building, you will be lost within seconds. People have died on the prairie in blizzards while trying to walk from their house to their barn, a distance of perhaps 50 yards. They become disoriented in the whiteout. They wander in circles. They freeze to death within sight of safety that they cannot see. This October blizzard lasts 3 days. When it finally clears, the landscape has been transformed. Snow has drifted into enormous banks, some of them 15 or 20 feet high. The railroad cuts, those narrow passages carved through low hills to keep the tracks level, have filled completely with snow. The trains cannot pass. The wind has packed the snow so tightly that it has become almost like ice, and the locomotive plows that the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad uses to clear the tracks are useless against it. But the settlers are not yet worried. October blizzards are unusual, but this is just one storm. Winter must end eventually. The trains will get through. Supplies will arrive. Spring will come. They have no way of knowing that this is only the beginning, that the blizzards will continue with almost no break until May, that they are trapped in what will later be known simply as the long winter, or the hard winter, or the snow winter, a season so terrible that it will be remembered for generations. You watch as the town begins to adapt to the new reality. The storekeeper, who had been selling supplies at normal prices, suddenly realizes that he may not receive new inventory for weeks or even months. His prices begin to climb. Flour that cost $2 for a 50-pound sack now costs $3, then $4, then $5. Kerosene for lamps becomes precious. Coal, which most families use to heat their homes, is already running low. The Ingalls family has moved from their homestead claim into town for the winter. Their claim shanty, a small wooden structure barely larger than a shed, is too exposed on the open prairie. In town, the buildings provide some shelter from the wind, and families can help each other. Charles has rented a building on Main Street, one that also serves as his surveyor's office. The family has crowded into this space, 7 people living in rooms designed for business, not habitation. You need to understand something about the Ingalls family's situation. They are not well prepared for a hard winter. Charles has been in DeSmet for less than 2 years. He has worked as a carpenter, as a labourer for the railroad, as a surveyor. He has filed a homestead claim, but the land has barely been broken. There is no mature crop, no abundant harvest to carry them through months of isolation. The family has provisions, but not as many as they should have. Caroline Ingalls, Charles's wife, has been conservative with supplies, buying carefully, making do with less than other families. It is economy born of necessity, not choice. The Ingalls have always lived close to the edge of financial disaster. This will matter terribly in the months to come, but you do not know that yet. You're still in October, watching the snow melt slightly during a brief warm spell, watching the settlers reassure themselves that the worst is over. They are wrong. The warm spell lasts perhaps 10 days. Then the cold returns, and with it, more blizzards. By November, you begin to see the pattern. The blizzards come every few days, sometimes lasting for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. Between the storms, there might be a day or two of relative calm, but the temperature rarely rises above freezing. Snow accumulates. Drifts grow higher. The railroad cuts fill with packed snow and ice that the railroad crews cannot clear no matter how many men they send with shovels and ploughs. The last train reaches DeSmet sometime in late December, or very early January. The exact date is disputed in historical accounts. Some sources say December. Others say the train made it through on January 4th, 1881. The specific date matters less than the result. After that final train departs, heading east toward the unfilled railroad cuts near Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, no more trains will reach DeSmet until May. The town is cut off completely from the outside world. You watch as this reality settles over the community. DeSmet has perhaps 200 to 300 residents, though exact population figures from this period are unclear. Some families have already left, heading south or east before the worst of the winter trapped them. Those who remain must survive on whatever supplies they have in their homes and whatever the storekeeper has in his inventory. The storekeeper's supplies dwindle rapidly. He rations what remains, selling only small quantities to each family. The price of flour climbs to $10 for a 50-pound sack, then $12, then more. Some families can afford these prices. The Boasts, who arrived earlier and established their claim more successfully, have money saved. The Wilders, a family from New York who brought capital and fine horses, can manage, but the Ingalls cannot. Charles Ingalls does not have $12 for a sack of flour, and even if he did, the storekeeper does not have enough flour to sell to everyone who needs it. The town organises a rationing system. A committee is formed, though the historical record does not preserve the names of all its members. This committee decides how the remaining food will be distributed. They attempt fairness, allocating supplies based on family size and need. But there is no good solution when the supplies are insufficient. Every decision means some families will go hungrier than others. The Ingalls family begins grinding wheat by hand to make flour. They have some wheat, though whether Charles bought it from another settler or had saved it from his own small crop is unclear. Caroline Ingalls uses a coffee mill to grind the wheat kernels into coarse flour. It is exhausting work. The mill is designed for coffee beans, not wheat. Each turn of the handle produces only a small amount of flour, and the family needs pounds of it every day to make the bread that has become their primary food. Mary Ingalls, the eldest daughter who went blind 2 years earlier from what was called brain fever, can help with some tasks but not with the grinding. Laura, the second daughter who's 14 years old this winter, takes her turn at the mill. Her younger sisters, Carrie and Grace, are too small to be much help. Charles grinds wheat before he leaves for whatever work he can find. Caroline grinds wheat between her other tasks. Laura grinds wheat until her arms ache and her hands cramp. The sound of the mill becomes the soundtrack of their survival, a steady grinding that produces flour that is never fine enough, never white, always coarse and dark and unsatisfying. You taste the bread made from this flour. It is dense and heavy. It does not rise properly because there is no yeast. It is gritty with particles of wheat bran that the mill could not grind fine. But it fills your stomach, and in the winter of 1880 to 1881 in DeSmet, Dakota Territory, a full stomach is the only ambition that matters. Fuel becomes as critical as food. Most families burn coal to heat their homes and cook their meals, but coal, like everything else, came by train. The supply that families laid in during the fall is running out. The railroad company has some coal in storage, and they sell it to residents at cost or sometimes give it away, because even the railroad men understand that people will freeze to death without fuel. But this supply is also limited. Families begin burning twisted hay for heat. The slough grass that grows wild on the prairie can be cut and twisted into tight sticks that burn with surprising heat. Men go out during the brief breaks between blizzards to cut hay from the sloughs. They bring it home in wagon loads. Women and children twist it into fuel sticks. It is labour-intensive and never-ending. Hay burns faster than coal. You must feed the stove constantly. But hay is available when coal is not, and frozen people cannot afford to be particular about their fuel source. The schoolhouse closes. There is no coal to heat it. Laura Ingalls, who has been attending school and hoping to earn a teaching certificate someday, watches her education pause. The town's social life contracts. People stay in their homes as much as possible, venturing out only when necessary. The isolation is psychological as much as physical. You're trapped in a small space with your family, grinding wheat and twisting hay, and waiting for the storms to end. Blizzards continue through December. On Christmas Day, a particularly fierce storm strikes, and families mark the holiday in darkened, cold homes, eating simple meals and trying to maintain some sense of celebration. But the holiday feels hollow when survival is uncertain and the future looks bleak. January 1881 is worse than anything that came before. You count the days when it does not snow, and they are so few that you can remember each one individually. Storm after storm hammers the town. The drifts are now so high that some buildings are half buried. People dig tunnels through the snow to reach their outbuildings. The main street of DeSmet, which was a wide dirt road in the summer, is now a narrow trench between walls of snow. Food supplies reach critical levels. The storekeepers' shelves are nearly empty. Families have exhausted their private reserves. The wheat that people have been grinding is running out. This wheat is not surplus. It is seed wheat, the grain that farmers saved from their harvest to plant in the spring. Using seed wheat for food means there will be no crop next year, no harvest, no future. But if you starve to death this winter, next year's crop is irrelevant. The moral calculation is brutal. Do you eat your seed wheat and survive the winter, knowing that you condemn yourself to another year of poverty and hunger? Or do you save your seed wheat and risk starvation now in the hope that you will live to plant it? Different families make different choices. Some guard their seed wheat jealously, rationing food so severely that they teeter on the edge of starvation, but preserve the possibility of a future. Others decide that the future is meaningless if they do not survive the present, and they consume their seed wheat without hesitation. The Ingalls family falls somewhere between these extremes. They use their wheat, but Caroline rations it carefully, calculating how much they can consume each day, while making the supply last as long as possible. The bread gets smaller, the portions shrink, hunger becomes a constant companion. You feel what chronic hunger does to a body. It is not the dramatic starvation you might imagine, where people collapse suddenly from lack of food. It is slower and more insidious. You're tired all the time. Your body conserves energy by making you lethargic. You feel cold even when the fire is burning because your body does not have enough fuel to maintain its temperature. Your mind works more slowly. Simple tasks require enormous effort. You become irritable and depressed. You stop caring about things that mattered to you before. All that matters is food and warmth, and the desperate hope that the trains will come before the last of the supplies run out. And then the rumours begin. Someone has heard that a settler living southeast of town has wheat. A farmer who came earlier and proved up a claim before the winter started. He supposedly planted a crop in the spring of 1880 and harvested it before the October blizzard. He has wheat in storage, enough wheat to make a difference. The name that circulates is Anderson, just Anderson. No first name is preserved in the historical record. He's a farmer who lives alone on his claim, perhaps 12 miles southeast of DeSmet, perhaps 15, perhaps 20. The distance varies depending on which account you read. Laura Ingalls Wilder, who will write about this winter decades later, says it was 20 miles. Other sources suggest less. The exact distance matters less than the isolation. Anderson's claim is far enough from town that no one has seen him since the blizzard started in October. He has been alone on his claim for 4 months, surviving through the same storms that have brought DeSmet to the brink of starvation. Does Anderson actually have wheat? No one knows for certain. The rumour is based on someone's memory of seeing Anderson harvest a crop last fall. But memories are unreliable, and the passage of months has blurred details. Perhaps Anderson did have wheat. Perhaps he's already consumed it. Perhaps he never had as much as people remember. Perhaps he died alone on his claim during one of the blizzards, and his wheat sits in his house beside his frozen body. There is only one way to find out. Someone needs to ride out to Anderson's claim, find him, and ask if he has wheat to sell. And this is where Almanzo Wilder enters the story. You need to understand who Almanzo Wilder is before we go any further, because the man who will ride out into the blizzard to save DeSmet is not the 19-year-old boy that Laura Ingalls Wilder will later describe in her novel. He is older, more complicated, and carrying a secret that could have cost him everything he owns. You are looking at the Federal Land Office records in Yankton, Dakota Territory, dated August 21st, 1879. A young man has just filed a homestead claim. His name is Almanzo James Wilder. He states under oath that he is 21 years old, the minimum age required by the Homestead Act of 1862 to claim 160 acres of federal land. He pays his $18 filing fee. He signs the documents. The land office clerk processes the paperwork without question and files it away. But if you could travel to Burke, New York, and examine the census records from 1860, 1870, and the New York State Census of 1875, you would find a different story. You would find a boy named Almanzo Wilder listed as age 1 in 1860, age 11 in 1870, and age 16 in 1875. The birth year is consistent across all 3 records, 1859, specifically February 13th, 1859. Which means that when Almanzo Wilder filed his homestead claim in August 1879, he was not 21 years old. He was 20. He lied on a federal document. He committed perjury to obtain land from the United States government. And no one caught him because the land office in Yankton had no way to cross-reference his claim with census records kept in New York. You watch Almanzo establish his claim on the Prairie near DeSmet. He's a stocky young man, strong from years of farm work, with light brown hair and a quiet demeanour. He comes from a prosperous farming family in New York. His father, James Wilder, owned substantial acreage and raised Morgan horses, a breed prized for its strength and temperament. Almanzo learned farming from his father, learned the value of good livestock, learned that success came from careful planning and hard work. But he also learned that opportunities in New York were limited. The good farmland was already claimed. Land prices were high. A young man starting out faced years of labouring on his father's farm with little prospect of owning his own land. The Dakota Territory offered something different. Free land for anyone willing to claim it and prove it up by living there for 5 years and making improvements. There was just one problem. Almanzo was too young. The Homestead Act required claimants to be 21 years old or the head of a household. Almanzo was unmarried and only 20. If he waited until his 21st birthday in February 1880, the best claims near DeSmet might be taken. The railroad was bringing settlers by the hundreds. Every month of delay meant better land going to someone else. So Almanzo made a choice. He lied about his age. He claimed to be 21 when he was only 20. He bet that no federal agent would travel from Dakota to New York to verify his birth date. He was right. The fraud passed without challenge. Almanzo received his claim, built his claim shanty, and began the work of proving up his homestead. You need to understand what this tells you about Almanzo's character. He's not a simple hero. He is pragmatic, willing to bend rules when necessary, capable of deception when it serves his interests. But he is also committed to the claim once he makes it. He works hard. He breaks sod. He plants crops. He builds a stable for his horses, 2 Morgan mares named Prince and Lady that he brought from New York. These horses are valuable animals, worth more than most settlers' entire inventory of possessions. By the winter of 1880 to 1881, Almanzo has been on his claim for a year and a half. He has built a solid claim shanty, better constructed than most because he has carpentry skills and some capital to buy good lumber. He has supplies that other settlers lack. His family sent provisions from New York. He has seed wheat stored for spring planting. He has hay for his horses. He is not wealthy, but he is better positioned than many families in DeSmet. The Ingalls family is among those less fortunate. Charles Ingalls arrived in DeSmet after Almanzo. His claim is less developed. His finances are more precarious. His family has less, food stored for the winter. And Almanzo notices this. You see Almanzo watching Laura Ingalls in town. She's 14 years old, thin and brown-haired, with a sharp mind and a practical nature. She helps her family without complaint. She grinds wheat until her arms ache. She twists hay into fuel sticks. She cares for her younger sisters. Almanzo is 21 years old, nearly 22. The age difference is significant. In later years, when Laura writes about their courtship, she will minimise this gap, making Almanzo younger in her novels than he actually was. But right now, in January 1881, Almanzo is a young man watching a girl who is still a child, and he sees something in her that interests him. But more than personal interest, Almanzo feels a sense of responsibility to the community. He has supplies when others are starving. He has horses capable of making a long journey when others have sold or eaten their livestock. He has the physical strength and the frontier skills to attempt something dangerous. And when the rumours circulate that Anderson might have wheat, Almanzo begins to consider whether someone should try to reach him. You are in DeSmet in early February 1881, and the town is dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly and inexorably. People are rationing food so severely that they are barely eating enough to sustain life. Children cry from hunger. Adults move slowly, conserving energy, their faces hollow and their eyes dull. The storekeeper's shelves are empty, except for a few items no one can afford. The coal is gone. The hay in the sloughs is buried under snow too deep to reach, and the blizzards keep coming. On February 2nd, a massive storm strikes. It lasts 9 days with almost no break. The wind howls. The snow falls so thickly that you cannot see the building across the street. The temperature drops to 20 or 30 below zero. People huddle in their homes, burning their furniture when the hay runs out, eating portions so small they barely qualify as meals. But on February 3rd or 4th, the exact date is disputed in historical accounts, the storm breaks. For the first time in more than a week, the wind stops. The snow stops falling. The sky clears to a pale, cold blue. The temperature is still far below freezing, but the air is calm. This is the moment. This is the window. Everyone in town knows that another storm will come soon. The pattern has been consistent all winter. A break in the weather never lasts more than a day or two before the next blizzard arrives. If someone is going to attempt to reach Anderson's claim, it must be now. You watch as Almanzo Wilder makes the decision. He talks to Charles Ingalls, who knows the general direction of Anderson's claim from his work as a surveyor. He talks to other men in town, gathering what information exists. No one has seen Anderson since October. No one knows for certain if he's alive or if he has wheat, but the rumours persist, and rumours are all the town has left. Almanzo decides he will go, but he will not go alone. Riding 20 miles across open prairie in the middle of winter, even on a calm day, is dangerous enough that a man travelling alone might easily die. If a horse breaks a leg, if the rider becomes disoriented, if a sudden storm catches him in the open, he will freeze to death with no one to help him. 2 riders have a better chance. They can help each other. They can share the burden of navigating. They can watch for storms together. The question is, who will go with him? The historical record says Cap Garland. You see him in DeSmet, a young man with dark hair and a quick smile. His real name is Oscar Edmund Garland, but everyone calls him Cap. He is 16 or 17 years old, one of the youngest men in town old enough to be considered for such a journey. His father died when Cap was 9, leaving his mother a widow with several children to raise. Cap has become the man of his household by necessity, working whatever jobs he can find to help support his family. Why does Cap agree to go? The historical record does not tell us his thoughts. Laura Ingalls Wilder's novel presents him as brave and adventurous, eager to help the town. But you need to consider other possibilities. Perhaps Cap feels obligated by masculine honour, unable to refuse when Almanzo asks without seeming cowardly. Perhaps he is desperate for the money that Almanzo might share if they successfully bring back wheat to sell. Perhaps he is simply so bored and stir-crazy after months trapped indoors that any action, even dangerous action, seems preferable to another day of waiting. Or perhaps Cap Garland did not go at all. This is where the story becomes complicated. Laura Ingalls Wilder named Cap as Almanzo's companion in both her unpublished autobiography and her novel. But Cap Garland's descendants, when interviewed by historians in the late 20th century, reported that their family had no oral tradition of Cap making this journey. No stories passed down. No mention in family letters or records. Cap himself died in 1891 in a threshing accident, 9 years before Laura published her first article about the hard winter, 49 years before she published the long winter novel. He never left a personal account of the wheat rescue mission. So did Cap go, and his family simply failed to preserve the story? Or did Laura invent or substitute Cap's participation, perhaps replacing Almanzo's actual companion with a more appealing character for her narrative? The truth is uncertain, but the town believes Cap went, and history has accepted that version, so we will proceed with the understanding that the historical record is incomplete and possibly inaccurate. You watch as Almanzo and Cap prepare for the journey. They will take Almanzo's horses, Prince and Lady. These Morgan mares are strong and steady, bred for endurance rather than speed. They have been fed carefully through the winter on the hay that Almanzo stored. They are not in peak condition because no animal could be after months of limited feed and no exercise, but they are better than most livestock in DeSmet. Almanzo hitches the horses to a light sled. They will not use a wagon because the snow is too deep. The sled's runners will glide over the surface more easily than wheels could roll. They pack minimal supplies, a rope, a shovel, some hay for the horses, a small amount of food for themselves, though there is almost nothing to pack. They will not bring firearms because firearms are heavy and ammunition is precious. They will rely on speed and the weather holding to get them to Anderson's claim and back. The plan is simple. They will head southeast from DeSmet, following the general direction that people remember Anderson's claim being located. They will look for his buildings, they will find him, negotiate to buy his wheat, load it onto the sled, and return to town before the next storm arrives. The entire journey must be completed in one day because spending a night on the open prairie in February is nearly certain death. They have perhaps 12 to 14 hours of daylight. They must use every hour. The town watches them prepare. Word has spread that Almanzo and Cap are attempting to reach Anderson. Some people are hopeful. Others think the attempt is foolish, that the 2 young men will die on the prairie and accomplish nothing. Charles Ingalls watches with particular intensity. He knows that if this mission succeeds, his family will eat, If it fails, they may not survive until spring. You stand in the bitter cold of pre-dawn on February 3rd or 4th, 1881. The temperature is perhaps 20 below zero. Your breath freezes in the air. The stars are still visible in the western sky, though the east is beginning to lighten with the approach of sunrise. Almanzo and Cap climb onto the sled. Almanzo takes the reins. The horses stamp their feet, their breath steaming in the frozen air, and they leave. The sled moves south and east out of town onto the open prairie. You watch them grow smaller, two figures on a sled pulled by two horses, crossing a landscape of white that stretches to the horizon in every direction. Within minutes, they have disappeared from view, swallowed by the immensity of the Dakota Prairie in winter. The town waits. You're Almanzo Wilder, and you're steering a sled across a frozen prairie with no road, no trail, no landmarks visible through the snow, and only a vague sense of direction to guide you. You know that Anderson's claim is southeast of DeSmet. You know it is perhaps 12 to 20 miles away, though no one has given you an exact distance. You know that he lives alone and that his buildings should be visible if you can get close enough. But the prairie in winter offers no help. Every direction looks the same. White snow covers everything. The sloughs that would serve as landmarks in summer are buried and indistinguishable from the surrounding land. The few trees that grow in this region are scattered and half buried in drifts. The sky's pale blue, painfully bright when you look up, offering no comfort. The sun has risen, but it provides light without warmth. The temperature remains far below freezing. You guide the horses southeast, or what you believe is southeast. Without a compass, navigation is a matter of keeping the sun at a certain angle and hoping that you're holding the course. Prince and Lady pull the sled steadily. They are good horses, responsive to the reins, willing to work even in these conditions. You have fed them as well as possible through the winter. They are thin but strong enough for this journey if you do not push them too hard. Cap sits beside you on the sled. He is quiet. Perhaps he is conserving energy. Perhaps he is regretting his decision to come. Perhaps he is simply watching the landscape, looking for any sign of buildings or smoke that would indicate Anderson's claim. Neither of you speaks much. The wind has died down, but the cold is so intense that talking feels like an unnecessary expenditure of breath. You have been riding for 2 hours, perhaps 3. How far have you come? 5 miles? 8? It is impossible to judge distance accurately when the landscape provides no reference points. The snow stretches endlessly in all directions. You begin to worry that you have veered off course, that you're riding parallel to Anderson's claim rather than toward it, that you will miss him entirely and wander until the horses exhaust themselves and you freeze to death. This is how people die on the prairie, not in dramatic accidents, but in slow miscalculations. You make a small error in navigation. You drift a few degrees off course. Hours pass. You realize your mistake too late. You're lost with no way to correct, and the cold does the rest. Your body temperature drops. You become confused. You stop thinking clearly. You make worse decisions. Eventually you stop moving. You freeze where you sit. In the spring, someone will find your body and shake their head at the foolishness of men who thought they could cross the winter prairie. You refuse to let that be your story. You keep riding. The sun climbs higher. The horse's breath creates clouds of steam that drift back toward you. Your face is numb despite the scarf wrapped around it. Your hands are stiff inside your gloves. You flex your fingers constantly to keep the blood flowing, but the cold is relentless. And then Cap points. You look where he is indicating and you see it. A smudge on the horizon. It could be a building. It could be a rise in the land. It could be nothing, a trick of light on snow. But it is the first thing you have seen in hours that is not flat white prairie, so you steer the horses toward it. As you get closer, the smudge resolves into structures. Buildings. Small. Probably just a claim. Shanty and maybe a barn or stable, but definitely human construction. You feel a surge of relief so intense it almost makes you dizzy. You have found Anderson's claim. Or you have found someone's claim, and you hope desperately that it is Anderson's. You approach cautiously. The buildings are half buried in snow. Drifts have piled against the walls, in some places reaching nearly to the roof. There is no smoke rising from the chimney. No tracks in the snow, no sign of recent activity. For a terrible moment you think that Anderson is dead, that you have come all this way to find a frozen corpse, that the wheat you hope to buy is locked inside a building with a man who can no longer sell it to you. But then the door opens. A man stands in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness of the interior. He's holding a rifle, not pointing at you, but holding it ready, because a man living alone on an isolated claim in the middle of winter has every reason to be cautious about strangers appearing at his door. You identify yourself. You tell him you are from DeSmet. You explain that the town is running out of food, that the trains have not come through since December, that people are starving. You ask if he has wheat to sell. Anderson, and you assume this is Anderson, though he has not confirmed his name yet, stares at you and Cap. He is gaunt, his face hollow, and his beard unkempt. He has been alone since October, surviving the same blizzards that have battered DeSmet, living in this tiny shanty with no contact with other human beings. 4 months of isolation does things to a man's mind. You can see it in his eyes, a wariness that goes beyond normal caution. He asks how you found him. You explain that people in town remembered his claim was southeast of DeSmet. He seems surprised that anyone remembered he existed. He seems surprised that anyone would attempt to cross the prairie in winter to reach him. Then you ask again, does he have wheat? Anderson hesitates. You can see him weighing his options. Finally, he admits that yes, he has wheat. He planted a crop in the spring of 1880. He harvested it in late summer before the October blizzard. He has approximately 30 to 40 bushels in storage. You feel hope rise in your chest. 40 bushels of wheat could feed DeSmet for weeks, maybe longer if it is rationed carefully. You tell Anderson you want to buy it. All of it, if he will sell. Anderson's face hardens. He says no. The wheat is his. He needs it. It is his seed wheat for spring planting. If he sells it to you, he will have nothing to plant when the weather warms. No crop means no harvest means no survival next winter. He cannot sell his future to feed strangers in a town he has never lived in. You understand his logic. In a rational calculation of self-interest, Anderson is making the correct choice. His wheat is worth more to him than any price you could pay because it represents his survival. The money you offer will not plant itself. It will not grow into a crop. It will not sustain him through next winter. The wheat will. But you also understand that his wheat is the difference between life and death for families in DeSmet. Children are starving. Families are burning their furniture to stay warm. The town will not survive until May unless someone brings food. You cannot let Anderson refuse. You cannot ride back to DeSmet empty-handed and watch people die knowing that wheat exists 12 miles away. So you negotiate. You tell Anderson that DeSmet will pay him well. You offer $1.25 per bushel, which is an extraordinary price. Before the winter, wheat might have sold for 50 or 60 cents per bushel. You're offering more than double that. 60 bushels at $1.25 each is $75, a substantial sum. 2 or 3 weeks' wages for a labourer. Enough to buy seed wheat in the spring from suppliers in Minnesota or Iowa once the trains run again. Anderson listens. You can see him calculating. The money is tempting. He has been alone for months. He probably has not handled cash since before the winter started. $75 is real, tangible, immediate wealth. But the wheat is also real, and its value is certain in a way that money's value is not. You press the argument. You tell him the trains will run in the spring. He will be able to buy seed wheat with the money you pay him. You tell him that DeSmet's survival matters, that families will die without this wheat, that he has the power to save lives by selling. You do not tell him that if he refuses, you and Cap might take the wheat by force. You do not threaten. You do not imply violence. But the possibility hangs in the air unspoken. Anderson is alone. You and Cap are 2 younger, stronger men. His rifle is inside the house, not in his hands anymore. If you chose to overpower him, to take the wheat without his consent, he could not stop you. And morally, could it be called theft to take food from one man who has enough to give to families who are starving? Is Anderson's property right to his seed wheat more important than the lives of children in DeSmet? But you do not take the wheat. You do not threaten. You simply negotiate, and eventually Anderson's resistance cracks. Perhaps he is swayed by the money. Perhaps he is moved by the description of starving families. Perhaps he simply wants you to leave so he can return to his solitude. Whatever his reasons, he agrees. He will sell you 60 bushels of wheat at $1.25 per bushel. You feel relief flood through you. You and Cap begin loading the wheat onto the sled. The sacks are heavy, 50 or 60 pounds each. You stack them carefully, trying to distribute the weight evenly so the sled will not tip. Anderson watches from his doorway. He does not help. This is not his mission. He has sold his property. What you do with it now is your concern. When the sled is loaded, you pay Anderson. Where the money comes from is unclear in the historical record. Does Almanzo have $75 with him? Does he promise to pay when you return to town? Does the town have a fund for this purchase? The accounts do not specify. But Anderson receives assurance of payment, and you and Cap climb back onto the now heavily loaded sled. The horses lean into their harness. The sled is much heavier than when you arrived. Prince and Lady strain to pull it, their hooves finding purchase in the snow. You turn the sled back toward DeSmet, toward the northwest, toward home, and you see the clouds. You're still at Anderson's claim, having just loaded 60 bushels of wheat onto your sled, when you notice the change in the sky. To the northwest, the direction you must travel to return to DeSmet, clouds are building. Not the wispy cirrus clouds that indicate fair weather, but the heavy dark masses that every settler in Dakota Territory has learned to fear. A blizzard is coming. You have perhaps 3 to 4 hours before the storm reaches you, maybe less. The distance back to DeSmet is 12 to 20 miles, depending on whose estimate of the outbound journey was correct. The sled is now loaded with half a ton of wheat. The horses are already tired from the morning's journey. You need to cover the return distance faster than you covered the outbound leg, and you need to do it with exhausted horses pulling a heavy load, while a blizzard closes in from behind. The mathematics of survival are brutally simple. If you reach DeSmet before the storm hits, you survive, and the town gets the wheat. If the storm catches you on the open prairie, you will die. The horses cannot run fast enough to outpace a Dakota blizzard. The wind will rise to 40 or 50 miles per hour. The snow will fall so thickly that you will not be able to see. The temperature will drop. You will become disoriented. You will freeze to death sitting on a sled full of wheat that will not save you, because you cannot build a fire from grain, and you cannot eat raw wheat fast enough to fuel your body against that cold. You look at Cap. He has seen the clouds too. His face is tight with fear, but he does not suggest turning back, does not suggest waiting out the storm at Anderson's claim. You cannot wait. Anderson has made clear that you are not welcome to stay. His space is too small, his provisions too limited to share, and even if he allowed you to remain, every hour you delay is an hour that DeSmet continues to starve. You snap the reins. Prince and Lady lean into their harness and the sled begins to move. The runners glide over the snow, but the weight of the wheat makes every step harder for the horses. You cannot push them too hard or they will collapse, but you cannot go too slowly or the storm will overtake you. You must find the balance between speed and endurance, urging the horses forward without breaking them. The sun is past its zenith now, beginning its descent toward the western horizon. You have perhaps 6 hours of daylight remaining. The storm clouds are spreading, darkening the northwestern sky. You steer the horses directly toward those clouds, because DeSmet lies in that direction. You are racing toward the very thing that will kill you if you do not move fast enough. You have been riding for an hour. The horses are labouring. Their breath comes harder, their pace slower. Prince stumbles in a drift, and for a terrible moment you think she will fall, think the sled will tip and spill the wheat across the prairie, think you will lose everything. But she recovers, finds her footing, continues pulling. The landscape offers no comfort. You are crossing the same featureless white expanse that you crossed this morning, but now every moment feels weighted with urgency. You try to retrace your route, looking for marks in the snow from the outbound journey, but the wind has already begun to erase them. You navigate by instinct and by keeping the sun at the correct angle, hoping that your sense of direction is accurate. Cap points out a feature you remember from the morning. A slight rise in the land, a place where the wind has scoured the snow down to bare grass. You pass this on the way out. Seeing it again confirms that you're on course, at least approximately. DeSmet lies ahead somewhere in the distance. You just need to keep moving, but the storm is moving faster than you are. You can see it now, a wall of grey-white advancing across the prairie. The leading edge is still miles away, but it is closer than it was 20 minutes ago. The wind is beginning to pick up, not yet the howling gale of a full blizzard, but a steady pressure that bites through your coat and makes the horses shake their heads in discomfort. You urge Prince and Lady faster. They respond, pulling harder, but you can feel their exhaustion. They have been working for 8 or 9 hours now with minimal rest. Their reserves are nearly spent. You estimate that you have covered perhaps 8 or 10 miles of the return journey. That means you still have 4 to 10 miles remaining, depending on which estimate of the total distance is correct. 4 miles is manageable, 10 miles is nearly impossible given the horse's condition and the approaching storm. You do not know which it is. You can only keep moving and hope. Another hour passes. The sun is lower. The storm is closer. The wind is stronger. Snow begins to fall, light at first, just a few flakes drifting down. But you know what this means. The storm has reached you. Within minutes the light snow will become heavy snow. The wind will increase. Visibility will collapse. You need to reach DeSmet now. Not in an hour, not in 30 minutes, but now. And then you see something ahead. Not buildings yet, but a change in the texture of the snow. Tracks. Wagon tracks. Nearly filled in, but still visible. These are the tracks from DeSmet's freight. Wagons. The route that connected the town to the railroad before the winter closed everything down. If you follow these tracks, they will lead you to town. You steer the horses onto the track route. Prince and Lady sense that they are approaching civilization, approaching rest and shelter and food. They find a reserve of energy and pull harder. The sled moves faster. The snow is falling more heavily now. The wind is rising. You can barely see 50 yards ahead. But the tracks guide you, a faint line through the white that promises safety if you can just keep following them. You see the buildings of DeSmet emerging from the snow, dark shapes against white, becoming clearer as you approach. You have made it. You have crossed the prairie twice in one day, found Anderson, negotiated for wheat, loaded it, and brought it back before the storm trapped you. You feel exhaustion and relief in equal measure, so overwhelming that you almost cannot process either emotion. People emerge from the buildings as you drive the sled down Main Street. They have been watching for you, hoping you would return, fearing you would not. They see the sacks of wheat piled on the sled and they shout. The news spreads instantly. Almanzo and Cap made it. They brought wheat. You stop the sled in front of the store. Your hands are so cold you can barely release the reins. Cap climbs down stiffly. The horses stand with their heads lowered, steam rising from their bodies, utterly spent. You know you will need to care for them, to rub them down and feed them and make sure they did not injure themselves on the journey. But first the wheat must be unloaded. Men from the town help carry the sacks inside. 60 bushels of wheat, weighing perhaps 3,000 pounds total, disappearing into the store where it will be measured and rationed and distributed to families who have been on the edge of starvation. You watch Charles Ingalls among the men carrying sacks. He does not thank you aloud. This is not the time for speeches or gratitude. The work must be done first. But you see the look in his eyes, the relief, the knowledge that his family will eat because of what you did today. The storm hits in full force an hour after you arrive. The wind howls. The snow falls so thickly that you cannot see across the street. If you had been delayed by even 30 minutes, if Prince had fallen and injured herself, if you had made one wrong turn and lost the wagon tracks, you would be dead on the prairie right now. The margin between success and death was that thin. But you made it. DeSmet has wheat. The town will survive. You are standing in the general store in DeSmet 2 days after the wheat rescue, and you're watching the town organize its survival. 60 bushels of wheat is a substantial quantity, approximately 2,000 pounds of grain, but it must feed a community of 200 to 300 people for an unknown period of time. The trains still have not come. The blizzards, still hammer the town every few days. Spring seems impossibly distant. The rationing committee meets to determine distribution. They must answer difficult questions with no good answers. How much wheat does each family receive? Do larger families get more, or is the distribution equal per person? What about families who still have their own provisions? Should they receive the same share as families who have nothing? What about Anderson's payment? Almanzo advanced money or credit for the wheat. How will the town reimburse him? The committee decides on a distribution system based on family size and need. Families self-report their remaining supplies, and while there is surely some dishonesty in these reports, people claiming to have less than they actually do in order to receive a larger share, the system is reasonably fair given the circumstances. Each family receives enough wheat to last several weeks if used carefully. It is not abundance. It is not even comfortable sufficiency, but it is survival. The Ingalls family receives their portion. Carolyn Ingalls looks at the sacks of wheat with an expression of profound relief. She's been rationing the family's dwindling supplies so severely that everyone has been chronically hungry for weeks. This wheat means her daughters will eat, not feast, but eat. The difference between hunger and starvation is measured in pounds of grain, and now the family has those pounds. The wheat must be ground into flour before it can be baked into bread. Caroline returns to the coffee mill, grinding grain by the handful. Laura takes her turns at the mill. Charles grinds wheat before he goes to work twisting hay or helping repair buildings. The sound of grinding fills their rooms again, a sound that means survival, that means another day, that means holding on until spring. You taste the bread made from this wheat. It is the same coarse, dense bread that the town has been eating for weeks, but it tastes better now because it is more certain. Before, each loaf might have been the last. Now, the family knows there will be more, not indefinitely, but for a while. And a while is all anyone can hope for in the winter of 1880 to 1881. The wheat buys time, but it does not end the winter. The blizzards continue through February, through March, into April. You watch the calendar turn from winter to spring according to dates, but the weather recognizes no such distinction. Snow falls in early April, temperatures remain below freezing, the railroad cuts remain blocked. No trains come. The town develops routines to cope with the endless winter. Families stay indoors as much as possible. Men venture out during breaks in the weather to cut hay from the sloughs, digging down through feet of snow to reach the frozen grass beneath. Women twist hay into fuel and grind wheat and cook meals that are monotonously the same day after day. Coarse bread, perhaps with a bit of grease if the family has any fat, left. Social life contracts to nearly nothing. There are no school sessions because there is no fuel to heat the schoolhouse. There are no church services for the same reason. Families visit each other occasionally during calm weather, but these visits are brief. No one has fuel to spare warming a house full of guests. No one has food to offer visitors. You sit in someone's cold parlour and talk for a few minutes, and then return home because there is no point in staying longer. Psychological strain begins to show. People become irritable, snapping at family members over trivial matters. Depression settles over the town like the snow, a heavy weight that saps motivation and hope. Some people cope by focusing on small tasks, mending clothes, carving wood, reading the same few books over and over. Others simply endure, sitting by inadequate fires and waiting for the winter to end. The Ingalls family experiences all of this. Laura will later write about the monotony, about grinding wheat until her arms ached, about the constant cold, about her father's worry and her mother's quiet strength. But she will also write about small moments of beauty, the sound of Pa's fiddle when he could bear to play it in the unheated house, the patterns of frost on the windows, the way sunlight looked on snow during rare, clear days. These small beauties do not make the winter less terrible, but they make it bearable. They remind you that the world contains more than suffering, that even in the worst circumstances there are moments worth noticing, worth remembering, worth surviving for. By late April, the town's wheat supply from the rescue mission is nearly exhausted. Families have been rationing carefully, but 60 bushels divided among hundreds of people cannot last forever. The calendar says it is spring. The weather says otherwise. Snow still covers the ground. Ice still clogs the railroad cuts. No trains have come, and then, finally, the pattern breaks. In mid-April, temperatures begin to rise consistently above freezing. The snow starts to melt slowly at first, then faster as warmer air moves in from the south. The accumulation of 6 months of snowfall begins to drain away. Water runs in streams across the prairie. The sloughs fill and overflow. The railroad cuts, which have been packed with ice and snow since December, begin to clear. On May 9th, 1881, though some accounts place the date a few days earlier or later, the first train reaches DeSmet since January. You hear the whistle in the distance, a sound you have not heard in 4 months. People run into the streets. They watch the locomotive approach, pulling freight cars loaded with supplies. Flour, coal, lumber, tools, clothing, mail. Everything the town has lacked for months arrives in a matter of hours. The siege is over. The hard winter, the long winter, the snow winter, whatever name history will give it, has ended. DeSmet survived. Not every town did. Some communities, further west, were abandoned entirely, their residents fleeing south or east when conditions became unbearable. Some people died of cold or starvation or disease in isolated cabins. But DeSmet endured, and Almanzo's wheat rescue was a significant factor in that survival. But you need to understand what the winter cost. Families exhausted their savings buying overpriced supplies. Farmers consumed their seed wheat and had nothing to plant. Livestock died of cold or starvation, or were slaughtered for food. Buildings were damaged by the weight of snow, or by being stripped for firewood. The psychological toll was immense. Depression, anxiety, trauma that would linger for years in those who lived through it. The Ingalls family emerged from the winter alive but impoverished. Charles's surveying work had provided some income, but not enough. The family's supplies were depleted. Their prospects for the coming year were uncertain. Laura's education had been interrupted. Mary's blindness made her dependent on family support. The family would struggle for years after the hard winter, never quite achieving the stability that Charles hoped for. Almanzo Wilder faced his own difficulties. He planted his claim in the spring of 1881, but the crop was poor. The following years brought more challenges. Diphtheria that struck both Almanzo and Laura, a stroke that left Almanzo partially paralysed, crop failures, debt, a house fire. By 1894, Almanzo and Laura would abandon their Dakota claims and move to Missouri, defeated by the same forces that defeated so many homesteaders. The wheat rescue mission saved DeSmet in the short term, but it could not save the town or its residents from the structural problems that made Dakota settlement so precarious. Inadequate rainfall, harsh climate, economic isolation. The failure of the Homestead Act's promise that 160 acres and 5 years of work would guarantee prosperity. You need to understand that what happened on the prairie in February 1881 and what Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about it 60 years later are not the same thing. The gap between event and story is where history becomes legend, where facts are shaped by memory and narrative need, where the messy complexity of real life is smoothed into the cleaner arc of fiction. You're Laura Ingalls, and it is 1928. You're 61 years old, living in Missouri on Rocky Ridge Farm. The wheat rescue happened 47 years ago. You were 14 years old when Almanzo and Cap rode out to Anderson's claim. You were not there on the prairie. You were in your family's building in DeSmet, grinding wheat and waiting, not knowing if the two young men would return or die trying. Everything you know about the journey itself came from stories told afterward. Almanzo described it. Probably. Other men in town who heard the details second-hand discussed it. Cap might have told his version, though he would die in 1891 when you were only 24 before you began writing seriously about your childhood. Your father, Charles, surely talked about it, because he had a storyteller's gift, and this was a story worth telling. But 47 years have passed. Memories fade, details blur. You remember the fear of that winter, the hunger, the cold, the grinding monotony of survival. You remember the relief when Almanzo and Cap returned, but the specific details, the exact route they took, the words spoken during the negotiation with Anderson, the precise timing of the storm, these have been smoothed by time into shapes that feel true, but may not be accurate. You sit down to write your autobiography, the manuscript you will call Pioneer Girl. You want to tell the truth about your life. You pride yourself on accuracy. You check facts when you can. But you're also constructing a narrative, choosing which details to include and which to omit, shaping events to create emotional impact and narrative arc. This is not dishonesty. This is storytelling. Every memoir does this. Every autobiography selects and arranges, but selections and arrangements create distortions. In your manuscript you mention the wheat rescue. You name Almanzo and Cap as the riders. You describe the journey in general terms, but you do not have space for every detail, and some details you no longer remember. The manuscript is rejected by publishers. It is too adult, they say, too long, too rambling. It does not fit any marketable category. So you put it away. And years later, with the help of your daughter Rose Wilder Lane, you transform it into something different. A series of children's novels that will eventually be called the Little House Books. You're 63 years old in 1940, and Harper and Brothers has just published your 6th book, The Long Winter. This book tells the story of the hard winter of 1880 to 1881. It describes the blizzards, the food shortage, the grinding of wheat, the twisting of hay, the fear and hunger and cold. And it describes Almanzo's wheat rescue in detail. But the Almanzo Wilder you write about in The Long Winter is not the Almanzo Wilder who actually made that journey. You have changed him. You have made him younger. In the novel, Almanzo is 19 years old. In reality, he was 21, nearly 22. Why the change? Perhaps because you met Almanzo when you were 15 and he was 23, and the 8-year age gap troubled you, or might trouble readers. Perhaps because a 19-year-old hero seems more appropriate for a children's book than a 22-year-old man pursuing a teenage girl. Perhaps because you wanted to minimize the age fraud, the lie about his birth year that allowed him to file his homestead claim illegally. Whatever the reason, you reduced his age in your fiction, and in doing so you created a version of Almanzo that millions of readers would accept as historical truth. You also shaped other details. You described the journey to Anderson's claim as 20 miles each way, 40 miles total. Is this accurate? Probably not exactly. Distances on the prairie were hard to judge. People's estimates varied, but 40 miles sounds appropriately heroic, appropriately dangerous. A 40-mile journey through blizzard conditions makes a better story than a 12-mile journey, even though 12 miles would have been dangerous enough. You include dialogue between Almanzo and Anderson. Anderson resists selling his wheat. He says, "That's not my lookout," when told about DeSmet starvation. Almanzo persuades him with payment and moral argument. These conversations may have happened approximately as you describe, or they may be your reconstruction, your best guess at what was said, shaped by your understanding of human nature and narrative necessity. You describe the race back to DeSmet with the storm closing in. You create tension by showing the clouds building, the horses labouring, the wind rising. This is good storytelling. It is also probably accurate in its essentials. But the specific details, how close the storm was, exactly when it hit, whether Almanzo truly thought he might not make it, these are narrative choices, not documented facts. And you never mention that Almanzo lied about his age to get his homestead claim. You never mention that his gravestone in Mansfield, Missouri will list his birth year as 1857, perpetuating the fraud into death. You never mention that this heroic figure was also a man who bent rules when it served his interests. This is not a criticism. This is observation. You wrote children's novels, not historical treatises. Your job was to tell engaging stories that taught values and entertained readers, not to document every complexity of frontier life. But the success of your books created a problem. Generations of readers grew up believing that the Little House series was history, not fiction. They believed that Almanzo was 19 during the wheat rescue. They believed that the conversations happened exactly as written. They believed the story because you told it so convincingly. You're a historian in 2014, and you are reading the newly published annotated edition of Pioneer Girl, Laura Ingalls Wilder's original manuscript. This is the first time scholars have had access to Laura's unedited account, and immediately questions arise. The manuscript mentions the wheat rescue, but with fewer details than the novel. Cap Garland is named. But the description is briefer, less dramatic. The historian Pamela Smith Hill, who edited the annotated version, notes discrepancies between the memoir and the published novel. The distances seem inconsistent. The timeline is vague. Some details that appear in The Long Winter are absent from Pioneer Girl, suggesting that Laura added them later, either from memory or from imagination. You begin researching Cap Garland's life. You find his birth record, Oscar Edmund Garland, born December 27, 1864. He would have been 16 years old during the wheat rescue, possibly 17 depending on the exact date of the journey. Young, but not impossibly young for such a task. Frontier boys became men early. 16-year-olds worked full days, supported families, took on adult responsibilities. But then you contact Cap Garland's descendants. You ask them about family stories, about oral history passed down through generations, and they tell you something unexpected. They have never heard of the wheat rescue. Their family has no tradition of Cap making this heroic journey. No letters mention it, no diary entries, no deathbed stories. Cap died in 1891 in a threshing machine accident, 26 years old, leaving a widow and children. His family mourned him and remembered him, but not as the young man who rode through a blizzard to save DeSmet. This absence troubles you. If Cap really made the journey, why would his family not remember it? Why would such a dramatic and heroic act be forgotten? 3 possibilities emerge. First, Cap did go, but he died before Laura began publishing her stories, and his family never knew the event would become famous, so they did not preserve it in their oral history. Second, Cap did go, but he downplayed it afterward, considering it simply what needed to be done rather than something heroic worthy of remembering. Third, Cap did not go at all, and Laura either misremembered who accompanied Almanzo or deliberately chose Cap for her narrative because he was a more appealing character than whoever actually made the journey. You cannot prove which possibility is correct. The historical record is incomplete. The people who could testify are dead. You're left with competing accounts and no way to reconcile them definitively. You turn to the meteorological evidence. A scientist named Barbara Mays Bousted has reconstructed the weather patterns of the winter of 1880 to 1881 using military records, railroad reports, and newspaper accounts. Her research confirms that the winter was extraordinarily severe. The accumulated Winter Season Severity Index ranks it among the worst on record. The blizzard frequency was unprecedented. The temperatures were brutal. Laura's descriptions of the weather in the long winter, which some critics once dismissed as exaggerated, turn out to be accurate. But Bousted's research cannot tell you exactly what the weather was like on the specific day that Almanzo and Cap rode to Anderson's claim. It can tell you that early February 1881 had multiple blizzards. It can tell you that calm days were rare and brief. It can tell you that the temperature was far below freezing. But the precise conditions on that one day, whether the storm really did chase them back to town, whether they truly came within an hour of being trapped on the prairie, these details cannot be verified through meteorological records. So you're left with Laura's account, written decades after the event, shaped by memory and narrative need and the requirements of children's literature. You cannot dismiss it as fiction because the core events almost certainly happened. Someone brought wheat to DeSmet during the hard winter, and that wheat helped the town survive. But you cannot accept every detail as literal truth because memory is imperfect and storytelling requires shaping. This is the nature of history. You work with incomplete evidence. You make judgments based on probability rather than certainty. You acknowledge that some questions cannot be answered and some mysteries will remain unsolved. Cap Garland either rode with Almanzo or he did not, but you will never know for certain which is true. What you do know is that the story of the wheat rescue has become larger than the event itself. It has become part of American mythology, a tale of heroism and self-sacrifice and community survival. Millions of people have read The Long Winter. Children have grown up admiring Almanzo's courage. The wheat rescue has been dramatised in television shows and pageants. It has become a defining story of frontier resilience, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the truth of a story is not only in its factual accuracy, but in its ability to convey something essential about human experience. The wheat rescue represents the desperation of pioneers facing impossible conditions, the moral complexity of survival, the thin line between life and death on the frontier. Whether every detail is accurate matters less than the larger truth the story tells. But you are a historian. You note the discrepancies. You record the uncertainties. You honour the people whose stories were lost or misremembered. And you acknowledge that the real Almanzo Wilder, age, fraud and all, was more complicated than the hero Laura created in her novels. You're sitting with all the evidence laid out before you, trying to separate verified fact from probable truth from possible fiction. This is the work of history, assembling fragments, weighing testimony, acknowledging uncertainty while still telling a coherent story. Here is what you know for certain. The winter of 1880 to 1881 was extraordinarily severe across the northern Great Plains. Multiple independent sources confirm this. Military weather records from Fort Bennett and Fort Randall, railroad company reports documenting the blockade, newspaper accounts from towns across Dakota Territory and Minnesota, and the personal diaries of settlers who lived through it. The meteorological evidence is overwhelming. This was not a normal winter. This was a catastrophic season that ranks among the worst in recorded American history. You know that DeSmet, Dakota Territory, was isolated by the railroad blockade from late December 1880 or early January 1881 until May 1881. Contemporary newspaper accounts confirm that trains could not get through. The railroad company's own records document their failed attempts to clear the snow from the cuts. This isolation was real and prolonged. You know that food shortages occurred in DeSmet and other prairie towns during this winter. Multiple settlers' accounts describe rationing, grinding wheat by hand, burning hay for fuel, and fearing starvation. The details are too consistent across too many sources to be fabricated. People were hungry. Some were starving. The crisis was genuine. You know that wheat was brought to DeSmet during the winter by someone. Laura's account is not the only source. Other DeSmet residents mentioned the wheat rescue in their memoirs and letters, though with less detail than Laura provided. The event happened. Someone rode out to find a farmer with wheat and brought it back to town. You know that Almanzo Wilder was in DeSmet during this winter. Census records place him there. Land office records show his homestead claim. He owned Morgan horses. He had some resources that other settlers lacked. He was physically capable of making such a journey. Beyond these certainties, you enter the realm of probability and possibility. It is probable that Almanzo Wilder was the person who brought wheat to DeSmet, because Laura's account is consistent, because no competing story names a different rescuer, and because Almanzo had the means and the motivation. But you cannot prove it absolutely because Almanzo himself left no written account of the journey. It is possible that Cap Garland accompanied Almanzo, because Laura named him in both her memoir and her novel, and she had no obvious reason to invent a second rider. But you cannot confirm it because Cap left no account, and his family has no memory of it. The absence of family tradition is troubling but not conclusive. Oral history is often lost within a generation or two, especially when the person dies young and unexpectedly. It is unclear exactly when the journey occurred. Laura says early February. Meteorological records show that a major blizzard did occur in early February 1881, with a brief break on February 3rd or 4th. This timing fits Laura's narrative, but the exact date cannot be verified. It is uncertain how far Anderson's claim was from DeSmet. Laura says 20 miles in one account. The novel suggests it might have been less, and other estimates range from 10 to 15 miles. Distance on the prairie was hard to judge. People's estimates varied. The journey was dangerous regardless of the precise mileage. It is unknown what words were actually spoken between Almanzo and Anderson. Laura wrote dialogue in her novel, but she was not present during the negotiation. She reconstructed the conversation based on what Almanzo told her afterward, filtered through decades of memory and shaped by narrative requirements. The essence of the negotiation probably happened. Anderson was reluctant to sell. Almanzo persuaded him with money and moral argument. But the specific words are Laura's creation. You need to confront the aspects of this story that complicate the heroic narrative. Almanzo Wilder lied on a federal document. This is not speculation. This is documented fact. 3 census records from 1860, 1870, and 1875 consistently list his birth year as 1859. The homestead claim he filed in August 1879 required him to be 21 years old. He was 20. He committed perjury. Why does this matter? Because it reveals that Almanzo was willing to break laws when they stood between him and what he wanted. He was pragmatic, not principled. He understood that frontier enforcement was lax, that the land office had no way to verify birth dates, that thousands of other young men were doing the same thing and getting away with it. He took the risk and it paid off. But it was still fraud. Laura Ingalls Wilder knew about this age discrepancy. She had to know. She married Almanzo in 1885. She knew his family. She had access to the same records that modern historians use. Yet she chose to obscure the truth in her novels by making Almanzo younger during the long winter, by never mentioning the homestead age requirement, by presenting him as straightforwardly heroic without the moral complexity that the age fraud introduces. This is not a condemnation of Laura. She was writing children's literature, not investigative journalism. She was creating heroes for young readers, and heroes work better when their flaws are minimized. But it is a reminder that the Little House books are crafted narratives, not unfiltered history. Laura made choices about what to include and what to omit, what to emphasize and what to downplay. Anderson, the farmer who sold the wheat, is presented in Laura's novel as selfish and reluctant, someone who needed to be persuaded to do the right thing. But was he wrong to hesitate? He was alone on his claim. He had survived 4 months of blizzards through careful preparation. His wheat was his seed for spring planting. Without it, he would have no crop, no harvest, no income next year. Selling it meant gambling that he could buy replacement seed wheat in the spring, assuming the trains ran and supplies were available, and prices were not inflated. From Anderson's perspective, the people in DeSmet made poor decisions. They came to Dakota Territory without adequate supplies. They failed to prepare for a hard winter despite warnings from old-timers and natural signs like the thick muskrat lodges. They consumed their seed wheat instead of rationing more severely. Now they expected him to bail them out of the consequences of their own choices. This is harsh, but it is not irrational. American frontier ideology emphasized individual responsibility and self-reliance. Anderson had been self-reliant. He had prepared adequately. The town had not. Why should he sacrifice his future for their present? The counter-argument is moral. When people are starving, when children are dying of hunger, property rights and individual liberty become secondary to the imperative of preserving human life. A man who has food and refuses to share it with starving neighbors, even for fair payment, is behaving immorally regardless of his legal rights. Both positions have merit. The wheat rescue story forces you to confront the tension between individual rights and communal obligation, between rational self-interest and moral duty. Laura's novel resolves this tension by having Almanzo persuade Anderson with payment and argument, a compromise that respects both property rights and communal need. But the novel also frames Anderson as the antagonist of this section, the obstacle that must be overcome. It does not give him the sympathetic treatment it gives to the Ingalls family or Almanzo. You are living in the 21st century, more than 140 years after the hard winter, and you're asking why this story of a wheat rescue on the Dakota Prairie deserves to be remembered and understood. Here is why it matters. First, it illuminates the gap between frontier mythology and frontier reality. American culture has long celebrated westward expansion as a story of rugged individualism, of self-reliant pioneers conquering a wilderness through hard work and determination. The wheat rescue complicates this narrative. It shows that survival on the frontier required community cooperation, mutual aid, and willingness to risk one's life for neighbours. Almanzo succeeded not because he was self-reliant, but because he was communally responsible. The town survived not through individual toughness, but through collective action, rationing committees, shared resources, coordinated distribution. Second, it demonstrates how historical memory is constructed through storytelling. The wheat rescue happened, but the version that most people know is Laura Ingalls Wilder's version, shaped by her literary goals and the constraints of children's publishing. Understanding the difference between event and narrative helps you read all historical sources more critically, recognizing that every account is filtered through the perspective and purposes of its author. Third, it reveals the moral complexity of survival under extreme conditions. The hard winter forced people to make impossible choices: eat seed wheat and survive today but have no crop next year, or save seed wheat and risk starvation now. Sell your supplies at inflated prices and profit from others' desperation, or sell at fair prices and run out yourself. Share resources equally and ensure everyone is equally miserable, or prioritize some families over others and create resentment. There were no good answers, only choices between different kinds of bad outcomes. Fourth, it reminds you that climate and environment shape human history in profound ways. The hard winter was not caused by human action. It was a meteorological event, a convergence of atmospheric conditions that created unprecedented weather. But its impact was shaped by human choices. The decision to settle in a semi-arid region ill-suited for small-scale farming, the railroad company's promotion of settlement for profit, the federal government's Homestead Act that allocated insufficient land for plains agriculture, the settlers' optimism that led them to underestimate winter preparation needs, natural disaster, and human systems interacted to create catastrophe. Finally, it preserves the memory of people who lived through something terrible and survived. The Ingalls family ground wheat by hand for months. They twisted hay for fuel. They rationed food until they were constantly hungry. They endured cold that penetrated every layer of clothing, that made simple tasks exhausting, that wore down their bodies and spirits. But they survived. And Laura, decades later, found a way to tell their story that honoured their struggle while creating something beautiful and meaningful for future generations. The wheat rescue is not the largest event in American history. It did not change the course of nations or alter political systems. It was a small drama played out in an isolated town by people whose names would be forgotten, except that one of them, Laura Ingalls Wilder, became a famous author. But small dramas reveal universal truths. The wheat rescue shows you what people are capable of when everything's at stake. Heroism and selfishness, cooperation and conflict, sacrifice and survival. You close the book, you turn off the light, and you carry with you the knowledge that history is not just the story of famous people and major events, but also the accumulation of small acts by ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Almanzo Wilder was flawed. Cap Garland may or may not have been there. Anderson had good reasons for his reluctance. Laura shaped the story to fit her purposes, but underneath all the complications and uncertainties, one truth remains. Someone rode out into the winter, found wheat, and brought it back. And that act of courage, however imperfect its execution, and however simplified its retelling, deserves to be remembered. You're standing in the Yankton Land Office in Dakota Territory on September the 12th, 1884, and you're watching Almanzo Wilder commit perjury for the second time. The first time was in August 1879 when he filed his homestead claim and lied about his age. This time he is giving his final proof testimony, the sworn statement required to receive the patent deed that will transfer ownership of his 160 acres from the federal government to him personally. The land office clerk asks Almanzo the standard questions. Has he lived continuously on the claim for 5 years? Yes. Has he built a habitable dwelling? Yes. Has he cultivated the land? Yes. Has he made improvements worth at least $200? Yes. Almanzo answers each question under oath. He signs his name. The clerk processes the paperwork, and just like that, Almanzo Wilder officially owns his Dakota Territory claim despite the fact that his original application was based on a fraudulent statement about his age. No federal agent has investigated. No one has compared his homestead application to census records. No one has questioned the discrepancy between his stated age in 1879 and his actual birth year. The system that was supposed to prevent fraud has failed completely, not through malice, but through sheer administrative impossibility. The Land Office in Yankton has no way to verify birth dates for thousands of applicants scattered across multiple states. They rely on sworn statements and hope that fear of perjury charges will keep people honest. But Almanzo knows something that the Land Office does not fully appreciate. Perjury charges require proof of intent to deceive, they require someone to file a complaint, and they require federal prosecutors willing to spend time and money pursuing what amounts to a minor age discrepancy. None of these things are likely to happen. Almanzo's fraud is safe because the system designed to catch it is toothless. You watch him leave the Land Office with his final proof certificate. He is now a legal landowner, his claim is secure, in a few weeks or months the patent deed will arrive by mail, an official document bearing the President's signature, Chester Arthur's in this case, transferring ownership from the United States government to Almanzo James Wilder. The fraud has been successfully laundered through bureaucratic process into legitimate property. But you need to understand what this means beyond Almanzo's individual case. The Homestead Act of 1862 was supposed to distribute public land fairly to citizens who would farm it productively. The age requirement, 21 years old or head of household, was meant to ensure that claimants were mature enough to succeed at farming and stable enough to remain on their claims. By allowing young men like Almanzo to lie about their ages, the system undermined its own goals. How many others did the same thing? The historical record cannot tell you precisely because the only way to catch age fraud is to cross-reference homestead applications with census records from multiple states, a task that would require examining millions of documents. Historians estimate that age fraud was common, perhaps endemic, but no one knows the true scale. Almanzo was not unusual, he was typical, and his success in getting away with it reveals how poorly the Homestead Act was enforced in practice. The irony is that Almanzo's fraud probably did not matter to his ultimate success or failure as a homesteader. Being 20 instead of 21 when he filed his claim did not make him less capable of farming. His eventual abandonment of the Dakota claim in the 1890s had nothing to do with his age, and everything to do with climate, economics, and the structural impossibility of making a 160-acre farm profitable in a semi-arid region. The Homestead Act failed not because people lied about their ages, but because the act itself was based on false assumptions about plains agriculture. But the fraud still matters because it reveals character. Almanzo was willing to lie to federal officials when he thought he could get away with it. He was willing to risk criminal prosecution, however unlikely that prosecution might be, in order to claim land a year earlier than the law allowed. This is not the simple frontier hero of Laura's novels. This is a more complex figure, pragmatic, opportunistic, willing to bend rules, but also capable of genuine courage and self-sacrifice. You see Almanzo return to his claim with his final proof certificate. He has won. He has gamed the system and faced no consequences. His wheat rescue mission during the hard winter has earned him respect in the community. His courtship of Laura Ingalls is progressing. He's 25 years old, though his homestead documents would suggest he's 27, and his future seems secure. But the future rarely cooperates with expectations. Within 4 years, Almanzo and Laura will marry. Within 8 years, they will lose nearly everything. Their health to diphtheria, their infant son to illness, their home to fire, their crops to drought, their financial stability to debt. The homestead that Almanzo obtained through fraud will ultimately fail not because of the fraud, but because the promise of the Homestead Act itself was fraudulent, a guarantee that 160 acres and hard work would bring prosperity when in fact the land required more acreage, more capital, more water, and more luck than most settlers possessed. The Dakota Prairie does not care whether Almanzo filed his claim legally or illegally. The blizzards come either way. The droughts strike regardless. The grasshoppers devour crops without checking property deeds. And when Almanzo and Laura finally abandon their claim and flee to Missouri in 1894, the Land Office will not refund Almanzo's filing fee or compensate him for his years of labour. The government will simply reclaim the failed homestead and offer it to the next optimistic settler willing to try. You're standing in the Mansfield Cemetery in Missouri on a cold morning in the 21st century, and you're looking at Almanzo Wilder's gravestone. The inscription reads, Almanzo James Wilder, February 13th, 1857, October 23rd, 1949. 1857, not 1859. The gravestone perpetuates the lie that Almanzo told in 1879 when he filed his homestead claim. It suggests he was born 2 years earlier than census records indicate, making him the correct age to file legally rather than admitting he committed fraud. And this false birth year has been carved in granite, a permanent marker that misleads everyone who visits his grave. Who chose this date? Laura was still alive when Almanzo died in 1949. She would have arranged his funeral, selected his gravestone, approved the inscription. Did she know the birth year was wrong? She must have. After 64 years of marriage, she certainly knew how old her husband was. But she chose to perpetuate the fiction, to maintain the false birth year that made Almanzo's homestead claim appear legitimate. Why? Perhaps because admitting the fraud would tarnish Almanzo's memory. Perhaps because she had spent decades writing books that presented him as heroic and upright, and acknowledging that he lied to federal officials would complicate that narrative. Perhaps because by 1949 it simply did not matter anymore. The homestead claim had failed. The Dakota years were ancient history. Almanzo was an old man who had lived a long, difficult life, and Laura saw no reason to let his gravestone advertise a youthful indiscretion. But the false birth year creates problems for historians. Every biography that relies on the gravestone rather than census records gets Almanzo's age wrong. Every timeline that uses 1857 as his birth year miscalculates how old he was during key events. The wheat rescue mission? He was not 19 as Laura's novel suggests, and he was not even 21 as the gravestone would imply if you do the math backward from his homestead filing. He was 21, approaching 22, a grown man, not a teenager. His courtship of Laura becomes more troubling when you get the ages right. When they met, Laura was 14 or 15. Almanzo was 23 or 24. When they married in 1885, Laura was 18. Almanzo was 26, possibly 27. The age gap, 8 to 9 years, is significant. Not illegal, not even particularly unusual for the time period, but substantial enough that Laura might have felt uncomfortable highlighting it in her novels. By making Almanzo younger in her fiction, by obscuring the true age difference, Laura created a more palatable romance for her readers. You step back from the gravestone and consider the cascade of deceptions. Almanzo lied to the land office. The land office failed to catch the lie. Almanzo's final proof testimony compounded the perjury. His gravestone perpetuated the false birth year. Laura's novels obscured the age fraud and minimized the age gap in their courtship. And generations of readers accepted all of this as historical fact because Laura Ingalls Wilder was beloved, trusted, and presumed to be telling the truth. This is how historical myths are constructed. Not through grand conspiracies or deliberate falsification by evil actors, but through small omissions, through flattering simplifications, through the natural human tendency to present ourselves and those we love in the best possible light. Laura was not lying exactly. She was curating. She was selecting which truths to emphasize and which to downplay. She was crafting a narrative that served her purposes, entertaining readers, teaching values, preserving family legacy, earning income during the Great Depression and beyond. But curation is not the same as accuracy, and when curated narratives become widely accepted as historical truth, they create distortions that historians must work to untangle. The real Almanzo Wilder is more interesting than the simplified hero of the Little House books. He was flawed and pragmatic and capable of both courage and deception. He risked his life to bring wheat to starving families, but he also lied on federal documents to advance his own interests. He loved Laura deeply, but he also pursued a teenage girl when he was a grown man. He worked hard to prove up his homestead, but he also abandoned it when conditions made success impossible. These complexities do not make Almanzo villainous, they make him human, and perhaps that is what the gravestone's false birth year ultimately erases: Almanzo's humanity, his capacity for moral ambiguity, his existence as a real person rather than a literary character. You leave the cemetery thinking about all the gravestones you have read that contain errors, all the family histories that perpetuate myths, all the beloved stories that simplify messy realities into clean narratives. History is not what happened. History is what people remember happening, what they choose to record, what they decide future generations should know. And sometimes, history is what people carve into granite and hope no one will question. You're back in the present day, sitting with all the evidence, all the research, all the contradictions and uncertainties, and you're forced to ask the question that undermines the entire heroic narrative of the wheat rescue mission. If Almanzo Wilder was willing to commit federal fraud to obtain his homestead claim, if he was willing to lie under oath twice, once when filing and once during final proof testimony, if he was willing to perpetuate that lie on his own gravestone, what else was he willing to lie about? Did the wheat rescue mission happen exactly as Laura described it? Probably in its essentials. Too many independent sources confirm that wheat was brought to DeSmet during the hard winter. But the specific details, the dialogue with Anderson, the exact distance travelled, the timing of the storm, Cap Garland's participation, how much of this is accurate memory, and how much is reconstructed narrative? Was Almanzo's motivation purely altruistic, or did he have other reasons for making the journey? Did he hope to profit by buying wheat cheap from Anderson and reselling it at inflated prices in DeSmet? Did he want to impress Laura and her family by playing the hero? Was he bored and reckless after months of confinement? The novel presents him as selflessly heroic, risking his life to save the town. But people are rarely motivated by single, pure emotions. Most actions arise from mixed motives, some noble and some self-interested. How many other details in the Little House books are similarly simplified or adjusted? Laura changed ages, including her own and Almanzo's. She omitted her brother Freddie entirely. She softened her descriptions of indigenous peoples after the original "there were no people, only Indians" line caused controversy. She condensed timelines and relocated events. She created dialogue for scenes she did not witness. Every autobiography and memoir does this. But the Little House books are not marketed as fictionalized memoir. They are presented and widely received as faithful accounts of frontier life. The question is not whether Laura lied. She did not, or at least not in any simple sense. She told true stories that she shaped for literary purposes. The question is, how much shaping is acceptable before truth becomes fiction? And the answer varies depending on who you ask. Literary scholars accept that memoir involves reconstruction and narrative craft. Historians prefer primary sources and contemporary documentation. Readers want engaging stories that feel authentic. These different standards create the space where myths are born. You realize that the wheat rescue mission is less important as a historical event than as a case study in how events become stories, stories become legends, and legends become accepted history. Almanzo rode out during a terrible winter. He found wheat, he brought it back. These facts are solid. Everything else, the drama, the heroism, the moral clarity, is interpretation layered on top of fact. And maybe that is how it should be. Maybe stories need heroes, even if real people are more complicated than heroes can be. Maybe the children reading The Long Winter need to believe in Almanzo's courage without wrestling with his fraud or his moral ambiguity. Maybe Laura understood that truth comes in different forms: literal truth, emotional truth, narrative truth. She chose narrative truth, the kind that teaches lessons and inspires readers and preserves family legacy, even when it meant simplifying or obscuring literal truth. But you are not a child reading a novel. You are an adult examining history, and you cannot ignore the evidence just because it complicates a beloved story. Almanzo Wilder lied to obtain his homestead. This is documented fact. He perpetuated that lie for his entire life, even unto his gravestone. This reveals something about his character that Laura chose not to emphasize in her books. Does this make him less heroic? That depends on how you define heroism. If heroism requires moral perfection, then yes, Almanzo falls short. But if heroism means courage and self-sacrifice despite personal flaws, then Almanzo qualifies. He risked his life in a blizzard to bring food to starving families. That act stands on its own, regardless of whether he lied on a homestead application 5 years earlier. The uncomfortable truth is that people are complicated. Almanzo could be both fraudster and hero, both opportunist and altruist, both self-interested and self-sacrificing. These qualities are not contradictions. They are the normal range of human behaviour. We all contain multitudes. We all act from mixed motives. We all have moments of courage and moments of moral compromise. Laura Ingalls. Wilder knew this. She lived with Almanzo for more than 60 years. She saw his strengths and his weaknesses. She knew about the age fraud because she had access to family records. She knew about his failed schemes, his poor business decisions, his stubborn pride that sometimes made their lives harder. But when she wrote about him in her books, she chose to emphasize his better qualities and downplay his flaws. She gave her readers the Almanzo they needed: brave, capable, steadfast, heroic. And perhaps that was the right choice for children's literature. But for history, for adults seeking to understand the real people behind the legends, the full truth matters. Almanzo Wilder was not the simple hero of the long winter. He was a complex man who lived in difficult times, who made both honourable choices and questionable ones, who saved lives during a blizzard but also defrauded his own government. The wheat rescue mission happened. But it happened to a real person, flawed and human, not to a literary character designed to teach moral lessons. And if you want to understand that event fully, you need to understand the man who undertook it fully. Fraud and hero, liar and rescuer. The Almanzo Wilder that Laura chose not to write about. But here's what Laura Ingalls Wilder never told you. That homestead claim Almanzo filed with his falsified age, it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was federal property obtained through perjury. It was land that legally should never have been his. And when Almanzo stood before that land office clerk in 1879 and swore he was 21 years old, he did not just bend the rules. He committed a crime that, under federal law, could have cost him everything: his land, his freedom, possibly even his life if prosecutors wanted to make an example of him. No one prosecuted, no one investigated, no one cared. But that does not mean the crime did not happen. It means the system was broken, that thousands of homesteaders lied their way onto federal land, that the greatest land distribution program in American history was riddled with fraud from the beginning. And Almanzo Wilder was not the exception. He was the rule. So here is the question that should keep you awake tonight. If the government was giving away land to anyone willing to lie about their age, who else was lying? What other frauds were committed? And how many of the frontier heroes you have been taught to admire built their fortunes on stolen land and forged documents? The Homestead Act promised 160 acres and a new life to anyone willing to work for it. But it never promised to check whether you were telling the truth. It never promised that the land was actually farmable. It never promised that you would survive your first winter. It just promised land, free for the taking if you could swear an oath and live with the consequences. Almanzo Wilder swore that oath. He lived with those consequences. And the wheat rescue that made him a hero happened because he was there, on land he obtained through fraud, with horses he could afford because his family had money, in a position to play saviour because the system had failed to catch his lies. Next time, we're going to investigate the Homestead Act itself. We're going to dig into the federal documents that no one ever reads. We're going to find out exactly how many people lied to claim land. We're going to examine the land office records, the perjury laws, the enforcement mechanisms that failed. We're going to ask why the government was so eager to give away land that it did not bother to verify who was taking it. And we're going to discover that the story of American westward expansion, the narrative of honest pioneers building a nation through hard work and integrity, might be the biggest fraud of all. The truth about Almanzo Wilder's age, how he lied to steal Dakota land, the Homestead Act investigation. That's next. Sleep well, if you can.